So hello there, and welcome to Sanctuary 201. Before we get started, we'd like to do what we've learned from Sanctuary 101, which is do a little bit of a community meeting. So I'm going to start that out with you, Robin, because it looks like it's just you and I on this one. So Robin, seeing it's such a beautiful day that we're currently recording this in, what type of outdoor thing represents the way you're feeling?
I am feeling like a sprinkler today.
I'm going to take it that that's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
All right. And what is your goal for right here, right now?
My goal is to articulate this information in a way that is meaningful and useful for folks.
And who will you ask for help with that?
I'm going to ask you for help, Jared.
All right. I got you.
So, Jerry, what outdoor thing are you feeling like today?
Well, I'm feeling like a hammock. I'm feeling like a hammock just out there in the breeze, relaxed, and enjoying this beautiful day.
What's your goal for this training?
Very much like you, my goal is to make sure that you and I are able to convey the importance of the content of this training. Um, and my goal is also to keep everybody safe because a lot of the topic and information contained within um, can bring about and evoke a lot of feelings for folks. So with that, I just want everyone to be mindful at any time any of these topics can, like I said, bring about certain feelings. So if you need to pause and collect yourself and take some time, then feel free to do so. And I'm going to ask you, Robin, you're my partner in crime in all this. So absolutely, I'll be reaching out to you.
I got you.
All right. So with that, I'm going to put the question out there for you just to think about, what does trauma mean to you? Because trauma has many, many, many faces. And, one trauma experience for one person, someone else experiencing that same event can walk away, either not impacted at all or impacted even in a deeper way than we might have been. So, with that, I'm going to throw some things out there, different situations, right, that all kind of fall under the umbrella of traumatic events. So, as you can see, these are just a few of the countless ways in which someone can be traumatized. Maybe you recognize an event in your life that's similar to what was on the screen, or maybe you experience something completely different. No matter what it is, what is going on when trauma happens is it disrupts attachment. Robin's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
So, attachment, right? So, we talk a lot about attachment when we're talking about trauma. And so it's important for us to have an understanding of what attachment is, right? So attachment is having a safe and healthy bond with a caregiver, right? So you think about the way that babies and children attach themselves to a caregiver. Do they feel safe with that caregiver? Are their needs being met by that caregiver? Can they rely on that caregiver? When all of those things are happening, the baby, the child develops a healthy and secure sense of attachment, which carries on into adulthood, right? So many of you know that I had a baby within the last year, and I see it a lot with him. He is very much attached to me, and he will often look back at me before he goes off and does things on his own. And it's that attachment that gives him the confidence to go off and try things, because he knows that I'm going to be right there if he needs me for anything. So you can kind of see how it impacts on many different levels, right? So when trauma is happening, it's going to interfere with the ability for that child to have that safe and healthy attachment to that caregiver. And so they have done a lot of research and have found that when that attachment is disrupted, it affects many other areas of our life. It affects many other functions. So you might see some challenges with emotional management. People aren't able to cope with their feelings, right? Again, I use my children as an example, right? If they get hurt or they stumble or they trip or they fall, you know, I'm often there to scoop them up and comfort them, right? So that is a way for them to start to build that emotional management of how to cope when things go wrong, right? So you might see some challenges with behavior, not knowing how to interact, not knowing how to, behave in different scenarios and different settings. What does it look like when they, go into a store, into a restaurant, all those sort of things. Relationships, understanding how to connect with one another, how to have conversations, how to feel like you can have that relationship, and self-care, how to take care of oneself, doing all the things necessary that might be helpful to, keep yourself in a good frame of mind, right? And the list goes on and on, the different ways that attachment can affect different areas of human functioning. So there was an example of a young man who went on a missionary trip to Uganda. And during this trip, he went to an orphanage. And when he went to this orphanage, he discovered that he walked in to the nursery where there were approximately 100 babies, and none of them were crying. And he was very curious about why this was happening. And essentially what he was told by the staff at the orphanage was that many of the babies, when they first came in, they would cry. And because they did not have the resources, they did not have the staffing to respond to them, they would often cry for hours on end. And eventually they learned, nobody's coming, my needs aren't going to be met. So they gave up, right? They kind of lost that sense of hope. They lost that sense of trust that somebody was going to be there for them. So this is a very strong example of how trauma can impact that attachment, that ability to have a healthy relationship with someone who's going to care for them. So what they have found was, cessation of the abuse does not necessarily change those imbalances or the dysfunction within the families, right? So just because the trauma, the abuse has ended does not mean that all those lasting effects, all those changes are no longer there, right? So it changes the way that a child thinks about their world. It actually shapes their worldview, and it provides them with a working model of how people interact, treat each other, and behave. So we're thinking about how this trauma in early childhood could potentially impact the way that they're viewing their world.
So trauma is the central problem, right? We know that there are a lot of things happen when an individual, regardless of what point in their life that they might experience that. The younger they are, the more it impedes their attachment. Perhaps another way that we can all relate to living in this technological world is we've probably experienced some level of computer malfunction, whether it be with our old desktops or on our phone. We're most likely to have had some sort of virus. So here's another way to think about trauma. Think about the time your computer, something got in there and it monkeyed with everything. Nothing worked right, right? That's what viruses do, and that's what trauma does. It gets in there and it changes the programming. It rewires things that are going on, and so they no longer function as they should. And that's very much what is happening with trauma. It actually changes the way the brain is wired and reconfigured, right? And just like with your computer, left untreated, it will continue to have those same types of problems. So that's kind of in some ways where we come in, right? We're going to help try to rewire some of that, try to learn the old ways that our programming used to be. Um, we know that most brain development occurs after birth, right? And throughout our time, all of those experiences come to shape the way our brain is developed, right? For good or ill. And trauma can change the brain structure while it is still growing, right? So all of those experiences, both good and bad, are having positive and often negative effects on the way in which we interpret and interact with the world and the people around us. So we've learned that by age 10, a child's value system is already embedded in the brain, right? We say value system for each person. What is their value system, right? And that all depends on what your upbringing was. For some of you, you may have been taught at a very young age to value the importance of being honest and being truthful, to not steal, to be respectful, right? And for others, maybe none of those things were passed along or instilled, right? Especially in for an individual that's experienced a lot of trauma, often there may be a negative value system that is programmed in there, meaning that I don't value um, following up and doing what I say that I'm going to do because I've learned that others don't do that. Um, I don't value not hurting someone because I was hurt, right? So we develop a negative value set. And often an individual that has experienced trauma does so at the hands of someone that creates a lot of stress for that individual. And we all experience stress to more or less a degree. It's part of what we go through. But when an individual experiences, especially at those developmental stages, such a high level of stress, it has a profound impact on the body. And all of that chronic stress over and over and over creates a chronic hyperarousal. And our body isn't equipped to deal with that level of stress over and over. Often in this training, I will talk about because most of us have some sort of vehicle, right? And we have to take care of that vehicle. We have to make sure the oil's changed, make sure that it has routine maintenance. But I ask people to think about what would it be like if we went out into that car and we turned it on and we put the gas pedal all the way down and we just held it there, right? Until all the gas ran out. Well, that's what it's like for an individual that's experienced chronic stress, right? Their engine or their body or their mind is being worked way too hard day in and day out. And sooner or later, it's going to start to fail or have problems that are related to that ongoing stress. So, what do we do when we're faced with that stress, right? I think all of us can relate at some point in our lives to being in a situation where we are confronted with something that is so overwhelming and we end up with a fight or a flight response, right? So if all of a sudden we're kind of backed into a corner and we don't have a choice about what to do, we may go into that space of, I need to fight, I need to survive. It's kind of evolutionary, right? We don't want to die. We're equipped to you know, continue carrying on. So we dig in and we stand our ground. We try to defend our position. We may attack, right? We're going to dig in. We're going to persevere. That's our biological imperative, right? But we also may, right? And this is also part of our survival is to run away, right? And that happens. If I can get away from whatever it is that's hurting me or attacking me, I'm going to flight. So I give way, retreat, remove myself. I might give up. I might move on. And for each of us, depending on the situation that is surrounding us, we may decide to fight or to flight. Both of those are rooted in our body's ability to try to make the best of that situation. How do I continuing carrying on? Sometimes we're left with no choice but to fight, and sometimes the better option might be to run, or at least we think that that might be the best thing to do. So we talked a little bit, right? How trauma alters that brain. It interferes with our normal emotional and cognitive development. As you might remember from Sanctuary 101, when we talk about the various stages of development, right? We hit those different milestones. We either come through those successfully, preparing us for the next stage of development, or it can hinder that development and create all sorts of additional problems that manifest from our inability to move through a particular stage successfully. We know that trauma is going to interfere with those developmental stages, both on an emotional and cognitive way. Emotional states that are too intense to handle, our brain tends to shut down, right? And that is further be reinforced by helplessness and a need for control, right? That's our body's response when it cannot cope and it cannot keep up with the level of stress that it's under. So, talked a little bit about the way in which those things can manifest within us. And Robin's going to talk a little bit more about what does that look like as we become saturated with that traumatic event and that chronic stress that is associated with those experiences. Things are going to happen as we interact and engage with the world around us, and things start happening potentially within us.
Right. So we're talking about the way that trauma is altering the brain and it's impacting all these different areas of human functioning, right? So what we're going to find is that there's a huge level of poor emotional management. And so people are trying to manage their emotions in the best way that they know. So for some people, it might be through external means, using substances, violence, self-harm, risk-taking. And oftentimes, these are the types of things that we see that bring individuals into our care, right? So as you get your information on your new individual, these might be some of the things that you're hearing about as to why they're here. These internal symptoms might be a little bit more difficult to identify, but it doesn't make them any less dangerous, right? So we're going to go through each of these. So first we have dissociation. And so dissociation is the brain's self-protective checking out response. It's a way for people to protect themselves when things are happening to them that are so extreme, so intense, that their head, their mind can't really process what's happening to them. So it's a way for them to survive. And so individuals who do this frequently, who frequently detach from those bodily experiences, they're going to start to experience a loss of reality. So they're not even going to be sure about if the experience actually even happened to them. And dissociation can be considered a form of emotional anesthetic to aid survival. So why does dissociation happen? Our major organs are actually tied to our emotions. So when something so extreme happens to us, there is a very real possibility that we could be scared to death, right? So this is our body's protective measure to allow us to go through an overwhelming experience without feeling that distress to the point where we are unable to respond or protect ourselves. So dissociation tends to happen on a continuum. And so this makes it a little bit easier to understand. So on the very mild end, we have daydreaming, right? And that's something that most people go through sometimes on a daily basis, right? I think about, on my days off, right? I'll get in my car to try to drive somewhere, and wouldn't you know, 15 minutes later, I come to and I realize that I'm actually driving to work, right? My body is so used to going through the motions of getting to work that that's what I start to do, right? And it's because I'm daydreaming. It's because my mind is detaching from my body and my body is on autopilot, right? This sometimes happens to me in the shower too. I sometimes don't know if I washed my hair because I start thinking about the day, so I do it again, because you never know, right? So that's a very mild form. It's an easy way for us to understand what is happening. On the severe end, we have dissociative identity disorder. And some of you might be more familiar with that, being known as multiple personality disorder. And so that's what happens when somebody experiences so much severe trauma that they start to actually develop these alternative personalities that step in during times of stress. So it's another protective measure to try to, help the individual when these horrific things are happening to them. They step in and they take the brunt of it so that the person themselves, the main person, doesn't have to think about it, doesn't have to feel, doesn't have to experience it. So we're going to watch a little clip about a woman who has dissociative identity disorder, and she's going to talk a little bit about her trauma, and we're going to see how those traumas ultimately led to the creation of these alternative identities.
Chrissy, I don't want you doing the strawberries.
I can wash them though, right?
And Papa, he has to have his coffee.
That's what my mom does.
And Chrissy wants to have her juice.
I want to know where the pink donuts are.
Breakfast time is a busy time at the Patillo home. The only place busier than the kitchen is Christine Patillo's mind.
'Cause I'm just extra special.
Tristan, you are extra special.
I love you. I love you. But I love me.
What do we have going?
Cindy was just out.
Christine has 6 other personalities called alters
Am I Aunt Annie?
living inside her head.
You don't like blueberries in your pancakes either, do you?
I don't actually mind them. She despises fruit.
All distinct and different, all with their own voice.
I can hear them if I'm paying attention. They can look out through my eyes and they can see what's ever in my peripheral.
Dada, one more.
Sure.
Try it out.
That is 2-year-old Cindy. The rest of the gang, as they're called, will introduce themselves.
Wait, I'm Christine.
I'm Chrissy. I'm Tristan, the lone male.
I'm she. I am Q. I do all the beads. I'm Rim.
Christine has dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. It's recognized by the American Psychiatric Association and affects just a fraction of 1% of the population.
Well, I, of course, always get to play.
Who's my wife gonna partner up with?
I'll be the shuffler.
Doctors say Christine's brain got shuffled, fractured is the clinical term, when she was a little girl.
I just seem to be going the wrong direction all the time.
And that's different from when?
Funny.
Oh, that's what I'm going to do. Here, shebang.
That didn't work out well for me at all.
Christine suffered physical and emotional abuse from her father throughout her childhood and what can be politely described as torturous sexual abuse at the hands of a neighbor from the ages of 7 to 9. Her childhood, a cruel game of survival.
That was complete being imprisoned in my mind.
Drawings Christine did in therapy show the violent battles inside her head. Doctors say when the brain can't handle any more abuse, it fractures into different personalities, and each one often serves a purpose. Instead of Christine suffering the sexual abuse, Rim, a tough tomboy, would appear and absorb the shame. The alter She, a gruff 30-year-old lesbian, would come out and take on the abuse from Christine's father. But as Christine got older, the personalities that once protected her turned.
There's a little bit of a triangle scar from a tip of an iron.
Rim led Christine to the dangerous world of drugs and promiscuity. Christine waking in places with people she didn't remember. Alter She was the worst abuser.
And we have a scar on in our hairline from when she smashed a picture frame. She used to smash pots and pans on us, and we'd have really big gnarly bruises and burns. Burning was a big thing.
It went on for years.
It's so frightening to feel like you don't have access to your mind. or can keep control, or that people think that you're a freak or that something's going on.
It's been a trying 26 years of marriage, to say the least, for Christopher. The couple never had children because between Christopher, Christine, and her 6 other personalities, 8 was enough. He's been husband, father, friend, and enemy, often all within the same 60-second span. The diagnosis 10 years ago answered a lot of questions for him. One question, however, never needed answering. Why did you stay?
This is my life, and this is my wife, and it's a beautiful thing, and I love being on the journey with her. Come on.
Come on, Dixie girl.
Let's go for a walk, Dixie. Come on.
After 2 decades of therapy, Christine has come to control the people living in her head.
But all is well.
It is.
The abuse from her other personalities has stopped, and Christine lives a relatively routine life. In fact, the altars are actually helping her to better integrate into society.
These are my bead people. Everything I make is one of a kind.
This is Q, who has started her own small business selling beaded jewelry. Christine watches Q do this from inside her own head and feels inspired to do more in public herself. For Q, it's more about changing others, not the 6 altars.
Different is uncomfortable for a lot of people, and we're just trying to make our different not be so spooky or so confusing to people.
One major step in that direction, the book Christine has written about her experience. One face with 7 voices, hoping to bring understanding and acceptance to a disorder so hard to comprehend.
We're at a place where we can be in society as a person with multiple personalities, and that we have an ability to talk to people and help them become more aware about a condition that is confusing and terrifying to people sometimes.
Is that my Poppy?
Ultimately, many with this illness hope to meld all the personalities back into one so they can lead a so-called normal life.
Cloud of butterflies above a purple lilac bush.
But for the Patillos, this is normal, and this is the way they'll stay.
It is my family, and it is a family that I would never want to lose.
Yes, I have a wonderful husband. I have great friends, and we've got to meet some amazing people on this journey, and we're just beginning.
She's just a normal person, and she just has all these people that live inside her.
Christine agreed to do this story with us because she wants to pull back the curtain on this rare but certainly disturbing disorder. She's hoping sales of her book will open the door to speaking events around the country so people can better understand and accept those living with multiple personalities.
All right, so the video does a nice job of kind of explaining what dissociation might look like, where it might stem from. She described her trauma history, her background, and how it led to the development of those alters, as she referred to them. So at Vanderheim, you're not typically going to work with somebody who has dissociative identity disorder. However, that doesn't mean that you may not work with some individuals that are dissociating. So remember that continuum that I talked about, right? Mild being that daydreaming and severe being the dissociative identity disorder. Somewhere in the middle, we're going to see some of these different areas, right? So you might see alexithymia, right? So a person is disconnected from their feelings, right? So this might be somebody who is kind of talking about something that has happened to them or is experiencing something, and they're kind of numb to the experience. They're just kind of talking about it. They're going through the motions rather than actually truly feeling those feelings. So they're completely disconnected from those feelings. You might work with somebody who experiences flashbacks. So that could be the re-experiencing of trauma as if it were happening in the present moment, right? So they may start to become triggered by something and immediately feel like they are back in that moment when the trauma is happening. So you might see them do or see things that they would have done in the moment as that trauma was happening. You might see individuals have nightmares, right? So disrupted sleep and re-experiencing the trauma in their dreams. And then body memories would be feeling pain or physical sensations in the body in response to a trauma. This we have heard happens sometimes with individuals who have been in like a car accident, right? You're in a certain scenario and your body all of a sudden gets really tense and starts shaking or something because your body is remembering that trauma. So your body's going through the motions. The other thing that you might see with individuals in terms of dissociation is, as the woman gave the example, she kind of talked about how she would, wake up in places and not realize where she was. And, sometimes for individuals, if they are used to dissociating, their mind kind of going somewhere else, sometimes that happens when stress happens on a regular basis, right? So there's a stress happening during the day. Maybe they get into a fight with their roommate or have a trouble with staff or whatever it might be. There's some sort of stress for them. So their mind just might start to dissociate because they're worried about, protecting themselves. And so they may not know what's happening in the moment. And then later when they talk about it, they just try to fill in the blanks. They try to fill in the gaps because they don't remember what happened. So it may come off as if somebody's lying to you, but for them, they're just trying to fill in the gaps because they don't remember, because they dissociated during that time of stress. So there's a lot of different forms of dissociation that you may see working with these individuals who may have experienced some severe trauma in their childhood. So other ways that individuals might try to manage their emotions is through reenactment, right? So reenactment is kind of this understanding that, what worked yesterday is going to work tomorrow. So if these are the experiences that I'm used to, I'm going to continue to go through these experiences, right? And so this is, kind of embedded in human nature as it is, right? We are very used to going through routines. I'm sure each and every one of us have some sort of morning routine that we go through, right? We do the same thing every single day. And that's a good thing, right? It helps us to stay on track. It helps us to be efficient. It helps us to make sure that we remember certain things. And so that's our solid routine. But what happens is when people are used to trauma and trauma relationships, they continue to replay those experiences over and over again, even though they're not in the same circumstances. So we refer to this as traumatic reenactment, right? So when what is familiar to a traumatized person is dangerous or harmful, repeating patterns can make them less functional, right? So if they're used to that fight or flight, they're going to apply that to everyday stresses. So even if there's not a real threat, so Jerry, talked about when there's a threat, we may have to fight, we may have to flight. Makes sense. But now if our bodies are so used to doing that, they're doing it when just a minor stress pops up. It comes off as being dysfunctional, right? It's not practical. So exposure to stress makes us all vulnerable to reenactment, right? So the people we treat don't have movies about their lives that we can watch, but they do kind of have these scripts. So we can kind of see these behaviors, these actions replaying through our relationships, right? So you're going to see individuals almost kind of cast us in these roles that they're used to seeing because that's what they're used to. That's their routine. That's going to be what they're striving for. And so what will help us to identify when reenactment is happening is using this triangle. So there tends to be 3 different roles in which people can play a role in when a reenactment is happening. So there's often a victim. So there's somebody who, the abuse, the trauma is happening to. And so this is characterized by the person, kind of feeling like they don't have control, feeling a sense of helplessness, feeling like things are always happening to them. Then there's the persecutor, and that's the person cast into the role as the one who does the abuse or who is the mean one or is the one who is the enforcer, right? And then there is the rescuer, so the person who swoops in and just fixes everything and makes things all better, right? They're the ones who kind of shut down the persecutor and they save the victim. None of those roles are roles that we want to find ourselves in because it means that we're replaying those traumas over and over again for the individuals. So we want to make sure that if we're starting to feel like we're being pushed into any of these roles, that we talk about it with our team and come up with strategies to get out of these reenactments. Now, what happens is we have our own stuff, right? We're all people. We have our own experiences. We have our own backgrounds. And sometimes our stuff can get mixed up with their stuff. And it creates the perfect storm for being sucked into these reenactments. So by being in their reenactment, we experience it ourselves. So we're going to start to feel like we're kind of just being pulled in. So we have to be aware of our own visceral reactions, because we can get pulled in unconsciously. We may not even realize that we're getting pulled in. But once we do, we need to kind of flip the script a little bit. So let's break down a scenario and see if we can identify the 3 roles of the reenactment triangle. So here we have a child who has a long history of sexual abuse. He was told by his social worker that he would have to go to the doctor. This appointment was particularly important since the child is diabetic and had recently had surgery. Without proper medical care, the child could potentially lose his leg. The social worker was adamant that the child should go to the doctor, knowing that this was in his best interest. Rather than understand that the social worker was trying to help him, he responded with severe aggression, grabbing the worker's hair and throwing her to the ground. Other staff came to help and ended up physically restraining the child. Right? So if we try to look at this scenario and pull out the 3 roles in the reenactment triangle, we're going to first look at who's the victim, right? So the child comes off as the victim. It's what something is happening to them. They are feeling a loss of control. The social worker comes off as the persecutor because she is the one who's pushing him to go to this appointment. And then the other staff coming in are the rescuers who are trying to help and trying to, kind of mitigate the situation. So if you were working with this individual, we would want to try to figure out strategies to make him feel like he has a little bit more control over the scenario, so that he didn't feel like he was being a victim, right? So this is ultimately what we want to end up doing. We want to teach the individuals about these reenactments and our staff so that we can quickly recognize it. We're going to use our sanctuary language to describe reenactments rather than blaming language, right? We're not blaming anybody in these scenarios. They're happening subconsciously. And we want to give them a different experience. So we want individuals to understand that things don't have to be this way forever. These relationship dynamics don't have to continue. There are other ways to handling these scenarios. So it's really important that we go back to our philosophy here of, rather than saying what's wrong with them, we want to say what's happened to them. We want to stop recreating the trauma by changing our own behavior, our language, and we want to think about how we talk to each other. So we want to make sure that we flip those scripts. So we talked a lot about how trauma can impact the brain, how we can see it in different types of behavior. So what we want to do is we want to think about how this can be applied in our everyday scenarios. So Jerry, would you mind helping me out here?
You got it.
So can you think of an individual that you have worked with in the past and you maybe knew a little bit about their traumatic experiences?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. Some that happened frequently that I would see when individuals would get into a skirmish or a fight with one another and things would escalate. And I would often see other individuals, there's one that comes to mind, that would always become extremely agitated, even though they weren't involved in the fight. None of it was directed towards them. But the situation became very chaotic and seemingly out of control. And for that particular individual, they would either run away or go in a space and hide. They would get into a very defensive, protective position, as if the anger and aggression were going to spill out in some way, harm them. And so you could see that something was happening there, that they were kind of walking back into that situation that they had been in, that they had lived in. And there was enough of the elements being presented in and around them that they started to feel as if they were back into their own trauma and were responding probably very much the way they would have had they been placed in that situation again. Another event that I had a direct experience with was I remember this one young man running around on the campus, and after hours of searching for them, and they were causing a lot of disruption on the campus. And it had gotten the better of me. I was becoming very frustrated myself. And I will never forget, when I finally realized where they were hiding in the woods, my patience was at its end. And I remember kind of coming around the corner and with a loud booming voice, told them, stop, don't run. And just took on this very authoritarian kind of a way about myself. And I remember watching that individual just kind of turn white and just stopped all behaviors and just walked with me, never said another word. This is going back probably 25 years ago. And I remember having a conversation with this clinician and the young man. And he was able to identify how, for him, I had taken on the role of his father. And I'll never forget that, because that was probably the first time of experiencing somebody that went into a full-blown state of reenactment, who immediately switched off who I was, who I had had a good relationship with him over and over and over, but just by my words and the tone of voice, and whatever it was that I conveyed, felt and put him back very much into a victim state of mind. And so that was experienced, that traumatic reenactment firsthand. So I've seen it play out in mild ways, in a severe way, and kind of all the places in between.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, because I think it really does a nice job of highlighting why it's important for us to talk about these reenactments, because I'm going to guess that moving forward, you altered the way that you responded to that young man, knowing that information about him. And that's ultimately what we want to do with this information. We want to recognize that sometimes the behaviors that we're seeing might cause us to feel a certain sort of way, but if we stop and think about what's driving those behaviors, we're going to have a better response to work with that individual in a much more therapeutic manner.
Right. For me, I think back how fortunate, right, we have Sanctuary, because back then we really kind of didn't understand the role that we often played in bringing about certain emotional reactions for individuals. We didn't have names for it back then, or at least we weren't talking about that. But really, that key point that you're saying about understanding how that trauma drives that behavior, and how we become an instrument in that. We play a part to either bring it about or help alleviate that. So always thinking about the individual, their behaviors, what's going on, and asking that question of, what happened to you versus what's wrong with you, really helps guide our response to the various situations that we might find ourselves in, or that we might be actually instigating or promoting.
So hopefully you guys watching this video take a minute to think about the individuals that you're working with. What do you know about their traumatic experiences? What do you know about how those experiences shape their behavior? And how can you use that information to change the way that you deliver services, how you intervene with that young person? Just good food for thought. So now Jerry's going to talk to us about the framework that we're going to use to talk about treatment, solve problems. Really, the possibilities are endless.
Right. So thankfully, Sanctuary helps us out with giving us various tools. And one of the tools that we'll be talking about is the self, right? Looking at things through a model called self, and it talks about safety, emotions, loss, and future, right? So what we're going to do is selfing, looking at things through this lens, allows us to organize our thinking about how to approach a number of situations, as well as understanding the cycle in which we all go through when we're experiencing a variety of trauma, from mild to severe. Right, there's certain components that are going to always be on display, and that need to be reconciled in order for us to move forward. So again, I like this acronym SELF because it really puts the focus on us. This is what is happening to us. This is what is going on for us. And, so us as staff, we need to be mindful of this um, concept on how to help another individual as well as ourselves. So let's take a look at the ultimately it's safety, but it's good to think about the self as this is not a static, meaning that it's dynamic, it's fluid, and it doesn't necessarily, somebody could be focused on the safety component. It could be a day, it could be an hour, it could be a week, it could be a month, right? In order for someone to feel safe again. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but there are various parts of safety. And so we're going to move in and out of those. And so sometimes just because maybe we moved on to another stage doesn't mean we're not going to fall back. So that's the dynamic component of the self model. We're going to use language that's simple and accessible, right? So that everybody can be on the same page as we're framing and talking about the trauma. And it'll apply to individuals as well as organizations and groups. And I think that's interesting, right? Because when we think about this, we often always frame everything about the individuals. But our organization, Vanner Heiden, is a very large organism, and it itself can experience things that threaten its overall safety. Collectively, we can have emotional responses to the climate and the culture that we are all immersed in. We can often experience loss collectively as a group. And through all of that, it kind of puts into question, where is our future, right? It brings about all of these feelings and emotions. So, again, thinking about it for the individual, thinking about it for ourselves, but also thinking about self as this larger thing that kind of guides all of our reactions and responses at all different levels to the trauma that the individual's experience, we might have experienced, and the organization could potentially be experiencing.
So we're going to break down these different components, right? So we first have safety. And we want to think back to our Sanctuary 101 training where we talk about the domains of safety. So there are 4 different domains of safety. So first we want to think about physical safety. So your body is safe from physical harm. So think about anything that could be physically unsafe, right? Punching, fighting, property damage, hurting oneself, self-harm could be considered physical harm, right? So anything that could be done with the body. Psychological safety is making sure that we're safe within ourselves, right? So when somebody is not psychologically safe, they're kind of tough on themselves. They think poorly of themselves. They beat themselves up, right? They talk down about themselves. They're no good. They're useless. They can't do anything right. They might have some suicidal thoughts. All of that would be considered psychological safety. Social safety, being safe with others, being safe in a group. So making sure that your relationships, your connections are safe and kind, and you feel like you can speak your mind and you can be part of the group. And then moral safety, you and your community are safe and consistent with your conscious values and beliefs, right? So moral safety is just feeling safe to do the right thing, right? Knowing what the right thing is, and then feeling like you have the ability to do it, that you're not going to be shamed or get into any sort of tough, sticky situation because you're doing the right thing. So that's moral safety. So as we're looking at using the self model as a way of structuring conversations, we could use the example of a new person in a program and look at their safety concerns, right? So Jerry, think about an individual who's brand new to a program. What sort of safety things might we be on the lookout for?
Well, again, I think about this other individual. They were about 12 years old as they came into a program, and they literally had been pulled from their mom's home. Dad was no longer in the picture, and there wasn't really any other adults in this individual's life. And they were coming from an unsafe environment, but they were also going to a place that they didn't know anything about. So they were feeling very, very unsafe as they walked in the door. Are these people friends or are they foe?
Mm-hmm.
Are these people going to hurt me? You know, maybe their past experiences, at least from my understanding, most of the adults in this person's life had hurt them. So they were walking in the door not knowing whether or not they were going to be safe from physical harm, psychologically, what were these people going to do and say to them? Didn't even have like any kind of social connection. So that was going to be an unfamiliar. So all of these things that you just spoke of in the different domains, that person was wrestling with them. They felt unsafe at all levels. And well, you can imagine that as I talk a little bit about what's going on with their emotions as we kind of move into the next slide,
Yeah.
we'll
So
see how that played in their ability to deal with this new environment.
so as we're looking at an individual like that, as being respectful to this model, we would think about ways in which we as staff could create a sense of safety for that individual. How do we try to make sure that we set him up for success for having those connections so he has that social safety? How do we make sure that we, do things to show him that we're going to keep him safe from any sort of physical harm? So it would be all part of the conversation that we would have before they even come into the program.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Without that understanding how that trauma is driving the behavior, and we just kind of overlooked at where they were coming from without paying attention to that. So let's not worry about where they came from. Let's just worry about, the great things that we're going to do. We'd be missing the opportunity to understand that individual may not be ready to accept any of the help that we want to be able to give. That there are necessary things that have to happen on our end to earn that trust, to make them feel safe without being aware, cognizant of all of those safety concerns that they've been experiencing. We're going to fail at our efforts, and we're going to be confused and not understand why I'm just being nice. Why wouldn't they just be receptive of that? So that's why, that whole piece is important. Emotion management, right? Those are some of the things that we're going to try to help that individual, being very young and most likely did not have a good positive role models in their life that were helping them develop good value sets, or not even concerned about whether or not that individual was in touch with their emotions, let alone being able to express those emotions. So again, thinking of ways, us as staff, how can I help? Well, teaching them to find words for feelings. When we think about our community meeting and how we're asking the questions about how are you feeling, that demonstrates many things. It gets the individuals to start being in touch with how am I feeling, and what kinds of feelings are out there. Hey, and that somebody cares enough to ask me how I'm feeling, right? And why does that matter? Why does it matter to me? Why does it matter to the people around me? So teaching that emotional management and us understanding the individual developmentally, where are they at? Maybe they're just so young that that's difficult for them to grasp, or maybe that is something that has never been made important, or a skill never developed. Somebody that doesn't express, they're neither expressing nor suppressing, but they're managing, right? That is a space that we can be in too, right? Where we're not kind of in touch with what's going on inside, or we're not expressing that, but we want to be in a space where we can kind of manage, what am I feeling? How can I deal with it in an appropriate way, and one that's not creating stress for myself or for the people that I'm interacting with. And trading in actions for words, right? When we don't have the emotional management tools or skills, then we're left with all of these unresolved feelings, and they can come out and manifest themselves in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it could be fighting, right? If I don't know how to say that what you're saying to me is hurtful, maybe I'll use my fist because that's my way of speaking, or maybe I'll run away, or maybe I'll hurt myself, right? Because I don't have the necessary skill set, tools, or words to let the world and the people around me know that I'm hurting and this is how I'm feeling, right? So we want to help individuals do that so we can get them to stop having to feel like they have to use actions, right? get them to use their words.
So then we have loss, right? And so there's a lot of different ways in which somebody can experience loss. Think about your own life and what sort of losses you have experienced. You know, loss can be physical loss, loss of a loved one. It could be loss of friendships, relationships. It could be anything. Think about a child coming into care. They are losing their everyday life with their family. They're losing their community. They're losing their bedroom. They're losing, you know, their ability to walk through the house, their own house. So now they have staff around. So there's a lot of different ways that a person can experience loss. And so we want to be respectful and mindful of those losses and how they can potentially impact somebody and how they are responding to their environment. We want to help them grieve those losses. We want to help them work through the process. We want to help them say goodbye, right? Because when you lose something, you have to take the opportunity to say goodbye so that you can move forward. You're going to refrain from reenactment, right? Because we want to make sure that we are moving forward, that we are moving on. So if we're going to continue to go through these reenactments, we're actually stuck in the past. So we're going to try to refrain from reenactment as much as possible and get to a place where we are moving forward.
So speaking of moving forward, right? The last part of our self model is future, right? Where do we go now, right? We're in a safety wise, we've learned to feel safe, right? We're able to feel psychologically, morally safe, right? We're learning new skills on how to deal with our emotions, right? Because life is never going to be perfect and things are always going to, you know, get in the way, but we've developed those skills and we're better equipped to deal with the emotional content that's going on. We've kind of been confronted with loss and we've learned how to work through that. And so where do we go with that? We want to build a different future. We don't want to always be wrestling the same demons, so to speak. And so we have to think differently as we move forward. We want to change that trajectory that we're on, right? And Robin spoke about scripts earlier. We're starting to rewrite new scripts, new responses, new ways of dealing with things that we once maybe dealt with poorly, or we dealt in such a way that were harmful to ourselves or the people around us, right? We start thinking about making some different choices. Right? We have to think about where it is that we want to get to. We're going to imagine and we're going to have a vision of a better place for ourselves, right? We can't imagine it. If we can't create a vision for that, then we most certainly aren't going to arrive there, right? So it's being able to see a life that is not filled with fear or hurt or abuse or any of those things, right? I can now imagine and envision that. So that is where we as staff can start helping the individuals to imagine a better way, a better place. We do that through our day-to-day interactions. We do that by creating safe environments, by using safe language, by all of our commitments, right? We're going to commit to not being violent. We're going to be paying attention to our interactions with our coworkers and how we deal with the individuals that we're trying to support, right? So in many, many ways, we are preparing and showing those individuals that there is a better and a brighter future, right? We're going to help support that. But we also need to be mindful, right, that this is a dynamic process and an individual, even though they can start feeling better about their future, something could come along, right, cause trauma reenactment, and maybe they start going back to not feeling psychologically safe again, right? So it's fluid, and our approach to this needs to go with that understanding that it's always a journey, right? We're always utilizing this tool and we're always working it. Seabiscuit.
So we're going to use this beloved film as a way of practicing using the self model. So for those of you who haven't seen it, Seabiscuit is a film about an underdog horse who goes on to accomplish great things. The following scene introduces the horse and describes the horse's history growing up, right? So we're going to watch a couple of clips from the movie. This first clip is going to show how he grew up and kind of some of the experiences that he went through.
He was the son of Hardtack, sired by the mighty Man-O-War, but the breeding did little to impress anyone at Claiborne Farms.
Get rid of him.
At 6 months, he was shipped off to train with the legendary trainer Sonny Fitzsimmons, who, over time, developed a similar opinion of the colt.
Is that a racehorse or a lead pony?
The judgment wasn't helped by his gentle nature. Where his sire had been a fierce, almost violent competitor, Seabiscuit took to sleeping for huge chunks of the day and enjoyed lolling for hours under the boughs of the juniper trees. His other great talent was eating. Though half the size of other colts, Seabiscuit could frequently eat twice as much. Fitzsimmons decided the horse was lazy and felt sure he could train the obstinance out of him.
I want you to hit him as many times as you can over a quarter of a mile.
When he didn't improve, they decided the colt was incorrigible. They made him a training partner to better horses, forcing him to lose head-to-head duels to boost the confidence of the other animal. By the time he was 3 years old, Seabiscuit was struggling in 2 cheap claiming races a week. Soon he grew as bitter and angry as his sire Hardtack had been. He was sold for the rock-bottom price of $2,000. And of course, it all made sense. Champions were large, they were sleek, they were without imperfection. When they finally did race him, he did just what they had trained him to do. He lost.
Okay, so hold your thoughts. We're going to get to them in a minute. We need to watch another clip first. So many people overlook the horse, and so it was all about finding the right jockey. It was about finding the right fit for him was going to be the best strategy. So this next clip is going to go over trying to find that good fit.
What exactly is it you like?
Got spirit.
I'll say.
Can he be ridden?
Oh, sure. Eventually. He can be a little touchy.
Yeah, I got it.
No, really.
I'm fine. Jesus Christ! Of course it's nuts.
Okay, so as we look at those clips, we think about what are some of the safety issues for Seabiscuit, right? So Jerry, what did you see?
Well, sure, they were hitting him, right? So his own physical safety, right? That feeling of being beaten, right? And then, you're training him to lose, to feel inferior to other horses. So you had all that emotional safety. you have all of these people that are constantly approaching you and, with very little regard for him as a horse, right? What his needs are or anything like that didn't make a difference, right? So there was a lot of safety issues going around, just uncaring people that only looked at him as what he might be able to win for them, right? So just being used.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about
And so
that very
from
first
that,
scene of him being taken away from his mother at such a young age.
oh, right, sure. Right. So that loss right from the very beginning, right? Yeah, I
Right from
missed
the
that.
very
Right.
beginning.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
so sad.
Yeah. And his ability to manage his emotions, like he didn't have any, was not taught anything, was just really left to respond, to survive, right? He was in the fight stage. He was always fighting, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so
He
he
had this
didn't really
gentle
have any.
nature, and they looked at that as being a negative thing.
Right, exactly, right. So his only thing, right, we talked about actions versus words. Well, he's a horse, right? Doesn't even have the ability to communicate what he's feeling. So he only had his ability to act, right? And that's what was going on. You talked about the losses that he experienced, right? The loss of his mother, and his future wasn't looking good, right? He was already sold off at $2,000, and if that didn't work, horses don't really tend to do well if they can't produce, right? So they're often, done away with. So his future wasn't looking good.
Yep. So
And I think
before his traumas, right, they described him as having a gentle nature. He liked to sleep and eat a lot and just seemed like he was kind of a low-key kind of horse. But then after all those traumas, being beaten, shuffled around, looked down on, forced to lose, you saw he became very bitter, angry, acting out, violent. Just a big change.
and it says how did he react to the traumas? Well, very much like they'd said his father, right, was exhibiting the same types of behaviors because most often that's what the father that sired him also experienced that same level of treatment.
Yep.
So you're going to ask me what would I do to help him heal? Well, I think that the next scene does a little bit better of a job trying to make sense of some of that. Oh, just on a note though, right? We see the gentleman look back and he sees the other young jockey, right, experiencing the same exact thing that the horse is going through. Experiencing his own ability to, whatever brought him to that stage. He was in that same fight or flight space and he was choosing fight because he was backed into a corner, couldn't run away, didn't have any other way to manage those emotions. So we see at this point that Seabiscuit and himself have a very parallel kind of life going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that they do a nice job in that scene of that first jockey kind of approaching him, right? And he was what I like to call a cocky jockey. He approached Seabiscuit with no regard for what the trainer was saying to him, right? Like, hey, he can be a little bit touchy, but nope, I got this. And
It's kind of like what I was saying, about individuals that come into program and we disregard what's going on with them and we just think, oh, we got this. I'll just be nice and everything will be okay, and not giving any real credence to what's driving that behavior.
Exactly. So hopefully the jockey that was having that parallel experience can approach him with a different way. Let's see.
I just can't help feeling they got him so screwed up running in a circle, he's forgotten what he was born to do. He just needs to learn how to be a horse again.
Well, how do you do that?
How far do you want me to take him?
Till he stops.
Okay.
Seems like a pretty good ride.
Hope so.
That's it, boy. Yeah, all right. Let's see what you got, boy. Ha! 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 Woo! That's it, folks. That's it.
Well, at least it wasn't expensive.
No, that's true.
God damn it! You're an amazing animal!
There. So we saw that the right approach can lead to great success, right? Before they started riding, the jockey said, you know, something along the lines of, seems like he'll be a good ride, right? He saw the potential. He saw the potential for the good in this horse. And he approached him with a soft hand and gave him encouragement, right? Let's see what you got, right? And Seabiscuit took off and he did his thing, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think I like the line where he said, let him be right what he's supposed to be, right? That he never had a chance to be. And a lot of times our role, we get caught up in the rescuing, right? We're gonna fix, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. And then sometimes we just need to create the space in the environment for individuals to be where they're at, where they should be at, whether it's to be able to play, to run, to do so to feel safe, right? Sometimes the easiest things that we can do is creating these non-traumatic environments, and allowing individuals an opportunity to some ways, be able to heal just by being who they are.
Great.
So do you want a note about your Sanctuary core team and
I would
your
love
new and
to.
inspired
Yes.
role?
Yes. So if this is interesting and you'd like to continue the work and driving the message of Sanctuary throughout the organization, we do have a Sanctuary core team, right? We're made up of members throughout the whole organization, all different levels, all different positions, and we meet the first and the third Tuesday of each month. So if you're interested in joining and helping out and making some connections and making magic happen, reach out, let us know. We'd love to have you.
Well, folks, we hope that this was helpful, that you learned some things that will help you doing your day-to-day work. But as always, if you have any more questions, you can reach out to Robin or myself. And we can be reached at the extension in our training room, 283-6500, extension 749, or my personal extension of 700, or Robin's extension of 292.
You get
All
it.
right. Well, have a great, wonderful day, folks.
Thanks, everybody.